And this is the last biological molecule. And I think this topic is not something new sa inyo kasi nucleic acids is actually part of grade 10 science lesson. And I'm sure you are all familiar with the ideas of nucleic acids. Specifically, pag ang ginagamit na nating words is DNA and chromosomes and RNA. So most of you are familiar with that. So yes, that will be our topic for today. I will focus on the structure of the different nucleic acids. We have two, the different parts of the DNA and the different parts of the RNA. So kung mapapansin niyo, wala pa po akong binibigay na modules for Biology 2, and it's because this is your last week to finalize your module for the fermentation output or for the fermentation product. Next week ko na ibibigay yung mga modules for Biology 2 under nucleic acids and the central dogma of the nucleic acids. Okay? So the function or the primary function of nucleic acid is in terms of storage of information. And we all know, and I think nabanggit naman na sa inyo when you were in high school and when you are in elementary, that the information or the instructions to the different traits that we have in our body is actually stored and it is actually contained in what we call as your DNA. So basically, the DNA just contains the instruction. So if we are going to make an analogy of it, para siyang, pag walang DNA, para kang naka-receive ng test paper na walang instruction na nakalagay. So kung yung test paper ay multiple choice, hindi mo alam kung bibilugan mo yung letter or isusulat mo yung sagot mo doon sa space before the number. So nakakalito. Yung iba bibilugan, yung iba isusulat. Even to the point na may mga test papers nga na may specific instruction na, pero alam niyo yun, hindi pa rin nasusunod, di ba? May mga makulit pa rin na ang sabi, isulat yung sagot doon sa dun sa line before the number, matigas pa rin yung ulo, gusto niyang bilugan, binilugan pa din niya, di ba? May specific instruction na nga na dapat all caps, tapos walang erasure, pero dahil gusto mong mag-erase at gusto mong small letters ang gamitin mo, di ba, ikaw pa rin yung nasunod. So, yun ngang may instruction, hindi pa ma-ensure ng 100% compliance. How much more ang isang test paper na walang instruction na nakasulat. So, syempre, mas magulo, mas nakakalito. So, that is the reason why nucleic acids are very important because they contain the instruction. They contain the information na itong proteins na to, ganito siya gagawin kasi ito yung function niya. Itong protein na ganito, ito yung function niya, so ganito siya gagawin. So para sa mga nagluluto, para siyang yung recipe, step-by-step instruction kung paano mo lulutuin yung tinapay or yung pagkain na yun. So yun yung function at yun yung importance ng nucleic acids. At ang information na nako-contain niya is how to create that organism. So kung tayong tao, paano step-by-step mabubuo yung isang tao mula sa fertilized egg papunta sa isang well-developed and complex na organism which contains these kinds of traits. And those information are found in our genes. At pag sinabi natin genes, then we are talking about, of course, your DNA. Okay, so number one, ang function niya, if you will go back to the idea of organelles inside the cell, the nucleic acids are actually found inside the nucleus. Okay? Inside the nucleus, you have what we call as your DNA. And of course, we know na itong mga DNA na to, they supercoil around each other, specifically in preparation for the cell division during the anong tawag dito, prophase, di ba? Saka sila nagpo-form ng tinatawag nating mga chromosomes. So, the chromosome is actually your DNA. Mas naka-coil or mas parang buhul-buhul lang sila, dikit-dikit lang sila. because they are preparing for cell division. And they contain the genetic material. And itong genetic material na to, or what we call as your genes, this is passed on from parent to offspring. So kung ano yung characteristics ng parents, mamamana siya or mai-inherit siya ng offspring, supposedly. Okay? Nagkataon lang na in humans and other sexually reproducing organisms, dalawa yung set of genes na nai-inherit niya. So hindi lahat nagmamanifest doon sa anak. So kung yung na-inherit niyang genes sa kanyang nanay, yun yung nag-manifest, ibig sabihin, yun yung, hindi ibig sabihin nun, wala siya nung genes ng tatay. Nandoon pa rin yung genes ng tatay, it's just that ang observable traits is yung nandoon sa nanay. Wait lang, may ipapakita ako. Yun. Wait lang ha. Gusto ko lang siya ipakita. Ayan. So, all organisms, specifically sexually reproducing organisms, inherit two sets of genes. Okay? So, meron tayong tinatawag na dominant gene at saka recessive gene. So, ang dominant gene kasi, ito yung nagmamanifest or na-observe. Kasi, kumbaga, mas malakas siya. Kaya nga, di ba, meron tayong tinatawag na malakas kasi yung dugo niya. Ibig sabihin nun, yung idea nila doon is that yung traits niya, hindi lang nai-inherit, na ma-manifest pa doon sa anak. Pero yung gene na recessive, ito yung binubuli nitong malaking pusa. Okay? Hindi ibig sabihin, hindi siya na-inherit. Na-inherit pa rin siya ng anak. It's just that, natabunan siya ng dominant gene. So, hindi yun yung nag-manifest sa iyo. So, for example, kung ang tatay mo ay matangkad, ang nanay mo ay maliit, pero yung nanay mo yung merong dominant gene, ibig sabihin, yung anak magiging maliit pa rin kahit anong tangkad ng tatay. So there is a possibility. Kasi nga, dalawa lagi yung nai-inherit na gene ng mga offspring. Okay, so sige, tigilan na natin yung meme ng dominant gene at saka recessive gene na yan. Let's continue to our slides. Yan. Okay, so other than it containing the genetic material which stores the information in the form of genes, specifically, ang information na yun is the blueprint for building proteins. So when we say blueprint, para sa mga architects and engineers, ito yung plano. Ito yung, kumbaga, yung itsura dapat ng magiging proteins mo. And you have to remember, di ba, when we studied about the different biological molecules, proteins yung pinakamadami. Dahil proteins yung pinakamadaming function. Iba-iba yung kaya nilang gawin sa loob ng katawan. Di ba, 8 yun? Meron sila sa immune system, meron sila sa structure, meron sila sa enzymes. Yung enzymes lang, iba't ibang uri ng enzymes ang meron sa loob ng katawan. So, paano nagagawa ng katawan yung iba't ibang uri ng proteins na yon? Kaya siya nagagawa kasi may instruction for each protein at yung instruction na yun is contained in your genes. Okay? So this is what we call as the central dogma of genetics. So ito yung, kumbaga, yung process niya on how the genes are translated into your proteins. We start with the DNA, and then the DNA will be transcripted into RNA, and then this RNA will be translated into what we call as proteins. So generally, the central dogma talks about the change from nucleic acid, from one form of a nucleic acid to another form of a nucleic acid, and then eventually it will become an amino acid. Okay, so magbabago siya ng anyo. And then again, if we are going to focus on the different cellular organelles, the DNA is found inside the nucleus, it will be transcripted or magpapalitan nyo siya, magiging RNA siya inside the nucleus as well. And then, from the nucleus, yung RNA ay lalabas, mapupunta siya ng, anong tawag dito? Mapupunta siya ng cytoplasm. Specifically, sa cytoplasm, merong mga ribosomes. At saka may mga ribosomes na naka-attach doon sa rough endoplasmic reticulum. So doon sa rough endoplasmic reticulum, pag-a-attach yung RNA where it will be translated into the different amino acids. Tapos pag nagawa na yung amino acid, ipapackage na siya ng Golgi apparatus. Tapos yung Golgi apparatus ang magdi-distribute or magpapadala, mala-ninja van, nitong mga amino acids into the different parts of the cell and the different parts of the body where these amino acids are needed. Okay, so we will talk in detail about these processes probably next week. Okay, so from DNA, the information is transferred to the RNA, and then the RNA will transfer this information to the proteins so that the proteins can now do their specific function. Okay? That's why they call it the blueprint for new cells. So yung paggawa ng panibagong cells and other organelles is contained in our genetic materials. Okay? Dami naman effect na ito. Okay, let's continue. Ayan. So this is the central dogma. So again, we start with the double-stranded DNA inside the nucleus. And then, yung information is ipapass on niya into the single-stranded RNA. The single-stranded RNA will now exit the nucleus and go to the cytoplasm. In the cytoplasm, it will attach itself into a ribosome. And then the ribosome will now create the amino acid, itong bilog-bilog na to, using the information coming from the RNA. Okay, so specifically, when we talk about nucleic acids, we have two. Dalawang uri lang yan. We have the RNA or the ribonucleic acid. And then, of course, we have the DNA or the deoxyribonucleic acid or deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, so we will talk about the differences between RNA and DNA. Kanilang monomers is a nucleotides, and later on we will know the different nucleotides found in an RNA and the different nucleotides found in a DNA. But one of the most well-described difference between RNA and DNA, of course, is the number of strands. We all know that DNA is a double helix or double-stranded nucleic acid. So, dalawa siya. It is also helical in nature, meaning they wound around each other. So, iniikutan nila yung isa't isa. Okay? Dahil dalawa sila. And then, when it comes to RNA, single strand lang siya. So dahil nag-iisa lang siya, wag na nating paikutin, mag-isa na nga lang siya, di ba? So single helix lang siya. Jornan, in-unlock ko na yung meeting room. So if Melvin and Troy would join, pwede na silang pumasok. Pasabi na lang. Thank you. Okay? So this is what a nucleotide look like. So each nucleotide contains 3 parts. The first one is the nitrogenous base. The second one is a sugar. And then the third one is a phosphate. Okay? So in DNA, ang kanyang sugar ay in the form of deoxyribose. Okay? So it is a pentose sugar. Ibig sabihin, 5 yung carbon niya. It's just that sa DNA, may additional OH siya, may additional hydroxyl group siya. Sa RNA kasi, ribonucleic acid lang siya. So, pentose sugar pa rin, pero wala na siyang additional hydroxyl group. Okay? So, other than the number of strands, magkaiba sila doon sa kind of sugar that it contains. Siyempre, coming from the name RNA, ribose yung kanyang sugar. Pagdating sa DNA, deoxyribose yung kanyang sugar. But both of them contains pentose sugar. And both of them contain what we call as the nitrogenous base. So, familiar kayo, I'm sure, sa nitrogenous base. In DNA, ang possible na nitrogenous base niya ay ATGC, which stands for adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. Whereas, sa RNA, ang kanyang nitrogenous bases ay adenine, uracil, cytosine, and guanine. So, ang pinagkaiba nila is, sa DNA, meron siyang thymine, yung letter T. Pero pagdating sa RNA, instead of thymine, meron siyang uracil. Okay? And then, of course, meron ding phosphate group, both the RNA and the DNA. Okay? So, ayan yung mga similarities and differences nila. So, they are similar because pareho silang nucleic acid, pareho silang made up of nucleotides, at pare-pareho silang ang nucleotide ay may nitrogenous base, may pentose sugar, at saka may phosphate group. In what way are they different? The number of strands, syempre yung isa, dalawa, DNA dalawa, yung RNA isa lang. In the kind of sugar that they contain, yung isa ay ribose, yung isa ay deoxyribose. Tapos in terms of the nitrogenous base, kasi yung DNA ay may thymine, pero yung RNA ay merong uracil. Okay? Ayan. So pentose sugar, ribose, and RNA, deoxyribose, and DNA. Ayan siya. Basically, ang pinagkaiba lang nila is the additional hydroxyl group. And then, pagdating sa phosphate group, they're basically the same. And then, of course, the nitrogenous base, ang pinagkaiba lang nila ay yung thymine and uracil. So, in terms of structure, ito yung itsura ng DNA. Double-stranded siya, at the same time, helical siya. Pagdating sa RNA, dahil single-stranded na siya, wala na siyang pwedeng ikutan. So, hindi na siya nag-form ng tinatawag nating helix. Okay? So, itong kulay blue na to, yan yung tinatawag nating backbone. And ang backbone niya is made up of the sugar and the phosphate. Okay? The same when it comes to RNA, itong kulay pink na to, ito yung tinatawag nating backbone. And the backbone is also composed of the sugar and the phosphate. Tapos, syempre, sa gitna, nandoon yung mga tinatawag nating nitrogenous bases. Kaya nandyan yung ATGC at saka yung AUGC naman for RNA. Okay? Mamaya pa siguro yun. Okay. So, when it comes to the nitrogenous bases, okay, meron tayong tinatawag na purines and pyrimidines. Okay? I'm not sure if this was discussed sa inyo when you were in junior high school. Some teachers are more detailed when it comes to their discussion, pero may mga teachers naman na they just give you the introduction or the basic foundation. And anyway, that's fine. So, kung ang naituro sa inyo ay nitrogenous bases na ATGC, actually they are still nitrogenous bases are grouped into two depending on the number of rings sa kanilang nitrogenous base. Okay? So, yung purines, ito yung mga double rings. Okay? So, kung mapapansin nyo dito sa structure niya, meron siyang isang malaking pentose ring dito. Tapos may additional na, may piatos siya dito, so 6 carbon dito. Tapos meron siyang pentose on the other side. So, may hexagon, tsaka may pentagon siya. So, ito yung tinatawag nating purines. Dalawa yung ring niya. Whereas, the pyrimidines, ito yung mga single rings. Okay? So, sa purines, dalawa lang yan. It's actually adenine and guanine. Pero pagdating sa pyrimidines, we have 3, 2 per nucleic acid. So for DNA, meron siyang cytosine at saka thymine. For RNA, meron siyang cytosine at saka uracil. Okay? So, based on this idea, several scientists were able to discover yung tinatawag nilang pairing between the nitrogenous bases. And you have to understand that the pairing between these nitrogenous bases will always be between one purine and one pyrimidine. Hindi pwedeng parehong purine ang magka-partner. Hindi rin pwedeng parehong pyrimidine ang magka-partner. So bakit? Kasi magkaiba sila. Kung parehong purine ang magka-partner, dahil pareho silang double rings, ibig sabihin pag nag-partner sila, ang laki ng space na makakain nila. So parang ang taba ng DNA. Tapos pagdating sa ilalim, parehong magka-partner na pyrimidine, parehong single ring. So originally, ito yung laki niya, yung width niya. Tapos pagdating sa baba, parehong pyrimidine, liliit. Kasi parehong single ring yung magka-partner. So, alam mo yun, magkakaroon na ng curves yung ating DNA. So, para ma-maintain niya, basically yung kanyang helical structure na iisa yung kanilang size. Iisa yung kanilang width, yung kanilang girth. Okay? Ang magka-partner lagi is the purine and the pyrimidine. So specifically, ang magka-partner is adenine at saka thymine for DNA. For RNA, it will become adenine and uracil. Tapos pagdating naman dun sa isang partner, it will become the guanine and the cytosine. Okay? Ayan. So, these are your nitrogenous bases. So, ang magka-partner talaga itong dalawang to. Double ring tsaka single ring. Tapos, another double ring at saka single ring. So, kahit na, alam mo yun, magkabali-baliktad man sila doon, at least, iisa lang yung kanilang size. Okay? Another thing na ipapakita ko, wait lang. I'm sure nakita nyo na to. Pero, sige, share ulit natin. Ayan, yung joke nila when it comes to the, to the different na nitrogenous bases. Ito daw kasi si adenine ay isang two-timer na babae. Okay? Pwede siyang mag-partner kay thymine, pero secretly, sa likod, pwede rin siyang pumartner kay uracil. So, depending on the nucleic acid. So, pag DNA, ang kapartner niya ay si thymine, pero pag RNA, ang kapartner niya ay si uracil. Ayan. Saya-saya ni Ayesa. Okay, let's continue. Balik tayo sa ating slides. Okay. Okay. And then another difference between DNA and RNA, of course, is the sugar. So may additional hydroxyl lang sa ribose. Sa deoxyribose, nabawasan siya ng oxygen dito. Hydrogen na lang yung naiwan sa kanya. Kaya deoxyribose is -1 oxygen molecule. Pero basically, they're both pentose sugars composed of 5 carbons. Okay? And then, ito yung idea that your nucleic acids are actually charged. Okay? So, meron silang tinatawag na 5' at saka yung 3'. So, explain ko na lang siya. So, basically, if this is your DNA, sasabi natin, di ba, meron tayong tinatawag na DNA backbone. So, ito yung phosphate, ito yung kulay, ito yung bilog. It is attached to the sugar, the pentose sugar. So, ito yung backbone niya, itong kulay green. And attached to this backbone are your nitrogenous bases. So, syempre, ito ay double ring. So, ito ay pyrimidine, purine, purine, pyrimidine, purine, purine. Okay? So, the sugar is always attached to your phosphate through what we call as phosphodiester bond. So, pagdating di ba ng ang tawag dito ng carbohydrates or monosaccharides and polysaccharides, anong kind of bond ang napo-form sa kanila? Sige nga, review. Anong bond between sugar molecules? Sino pang makakatanda? Favorite na topic to ni ni Jernan. Jordsen, sige. Anong klaseng bonds are formed between sugar molecules?
Di ba po yung polypeptide bond? Polypeptide.
It's not polypeptide bonds. Coming from the word peptide, proteins yun eh. Okay, so sige, anong bonds ang found between, it starts with a letter G. O hint. Starts with a letter G. Sige, Jordsen.
Glycosidic bond? Mute ka, Chair.
How about for lipids? Anong klaseng bonds ang meron sa lipids? Sige, hint. It starts with the letter E.
Ester bond.
Okay, so may ester bonds tayo. How about for amino acids? Ano ang bonds na meron sa kanila? Sinabi na pala yan. Peptide bonds. Okay, so for sugar, we have the glycosidic bonds. For the lipids, we have the ester bonds. And then for the amino acids, we have the peptide bonds. Pero pagdating sa nucleic acids, we have what we call as phosphodiester bonds. So this bond is actually formed between the ribose or the deoxyribose sugar and the phosphate molecule. So itong connection nila on this part, nasan ba yung laser? Itong part na to, ayan, meron palang ganun. So yung part na yan is formed by what we call as phosphodiester bond. Okay? So ayan, yung linkage between the phosphate and the sugar. Okay? And then of course, we have what we call as the nitrogenous bases. Huwag na yan, saglit na. Saan na ba yun? Ayan. Sa nitrogenous bases kasi, it depends kung saan naka-attach yung nitrogenous base doon sa sugar. Okay? So for example, ito yung DNA natin. So this is one backbone and this is another backbone. Okay? So kung saan naka-attach itong phosphate na to, yun yung kanyang direction. So for example, this is carbon 1, carbon 2, carbon 3, carbon 4, and then carbon 5. So dyan sa carbon 5 ng sugar, naka-attach itong phosphate. So this is what we call as 5'. On the other side kasi, kung nasaan naka-attach yung 1, 2, 3. So nandito siya, diba? Carbon 1, carbon 2, and carbon 3. So ibig sabihin, yung nasa ilalim nitong strand na to is what we call as 3'. So itong strand na to, ang direction niya is 5' going to 3'. Okay? Ulitin natin. Yung taas na phosphate ay naka-attach doon sa panglimang carbon ng sugar. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Tapos yung phosphate sa ibaba ay naka-attach sa carbon 3. So carbon 1, 2, 3. So this is 5, 3. Pag binilang ulit natin itong sugar na to, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, naka-attach siya sa 5. Yung nasa baba, 1, 2, 3. Naka-attach siya sa 3. Again, this is 5. This is 3. This is 5. This is 3. So, ang direction nitong strand ng DNA na to is going from 5' to 3'. Okay? Okay tayo doon? Pa-thumbs up sign kung naiintindihan. Okay. So, wait lang unfortunately, mag-i-end yung aking meeting room. So, join na lang ulit sa same link, tapos continue natin yung discussion when it comes to nucleic acid.